I just want to welcome everybody to our second series for Australia. We had a little bit of technical difficulties our last go-round. And in case you don't know who I am, I'm Lisa Torgerson. I am the Director of Leisure Travel Services at Travelex International. But I think we've worked out all the kinks with our technical difficulties from the last time, so we're very excited that you're back with us, Peter. And for those of you who may not have joined us for the last series that we did, Peter is our resident expert for Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. We work exclusively with Southern World on these destinations because they do a fabulous job for us as well as our clients. So Peter, I'm going to let you take it away and take us on a journey through Australia.
Excellent, thanks Lisa. So yes, I won't talk much about Southern World. Lisa's given me an introduction, but we are their ground operator in Australia, New Zealand and Fiji. So tonight we're going to talk mainly about the state of Victoria, with a little bit of an entree into South Australia as well as we journey down the Great Ocean Road. But I thought I would start off by just giving you a bit of an update on the state of Australia. We've obviously been in the news over the last month and a half with the devastating fires that we've had down there. But I will let you know that as devastating as it looked, because of the 24/7 news that we have in this country, it really was only about 3% of Australia that was affected. Australia as a landmass is about the same size as the United States. So if you could imagine just the state of Indiana being the affected size, as big as Indiana is, when you put it in context with a continent the size of Australia, it's not that great a landmass or area. You know, we did have substantial wildlife loss, but not quite as dramatic as what was portrayed. And fires are a natural phenomenon in Australia. We have bushfires produced basically by nature because a lot of the trees are eucalypts, so they burn very easily. And it's part of a reforestation that happens every year. We have a fire season. It's not something that has never occurred before. It happens every year. But this one was just a little bit bigger than in the past. And we did have, obviously, some loss of life, obviously loss of land. That has, in the major part, been regenerated already. We've had monstrous rains over the last few weeks, so all the fires have been quelled. So that's just like a positive update. And Australia is certainly back open for business, and we welcome United States visitors back to Australia. So in saying all that, let's just do a little trip through the state of Victoria. Let's get this going from the start here. So Melbourne is the capital city of the state of Victoria, and you can see that all the way down in the bottom of Australia. It's the most southern state other than Tasmania, the island state right below it. It is an amazing city and a capital of an amazing state. It's been voted many years over as the most livable city in the world. It has the largest tram system outside of Europe. It has a population of about 5 million people. And one of the cool things about Melbourne is it's a river city. So like Brisbane, like Perth, one of a few cities in Australia that's based around a river called the Yarra River. So let's explore, and I can tell you a little bit about Melbourne. It's a gateway to Australia from three North American gateways: Vancouver, San Francisco, and LA, and obviously as well as Honolulu if you wanted to stop over on the way to Melbourne. It's also a great taking off place for New Zealand, as many of you will also visit my home country, New Zealand, and so you can fly to Melbourne to various ports in New Zealand as well. I'm going to play you a video just to give you a feel for the city before I continue my presentation.
This is not a typical tourist destination. There's no tourist trail here. Instead, new paths are forged every day from the crackle of intense creativity. This is a place of makers, where progressive attitudes reign, creating new, unexpected, and eclectic experiences. These aren't traditional tourist attractions. They're experiences that are born out of daring combinations, imaginative inventions, and the unhindered experimentation. For visitors, this means it's less about selfie moments and more about self-fulfillment, enjoying every aspect of who you are and who and what you love. Sure, there are plenty of sights for visitors to see here, but it's what you feel that sets us apart. Feel inspired by art that spills from the galleries into the street. Feel goosebumps in one of the world's best theatre districts. Feel the roar of the crowd and the excitement in the air. Foodies will feel like they're in heaven with world-famous restaurants and the very Melbourne rooftop bars and cafes. Music fans will feel spoilt for choice with over 3,000 gigs happening every week. Yep, every week. Fashion lovers will feel the thrill of discovering new designs from indie stores to local markets. And when you feel like taking things a little more slowly, regional Victoria feels like a very different place, even just an hour from the city. Instead of tourist guides, you'll meet locals who are always ready to help. Well, most of them. You'll feel the pull of the mountains, the call of the open road, a sense of awe as you stare out at the rugged coastline. When you're surrounded by wildlife and nature, time slows down and your senses are dialed up. It's the perfect time to eat and drink at the source. From acclaimed restaurants to rustic cellar doors and market gates, it's as if the flavours are intensified by your stunning surroundings. Because that's the real beauty of Victoria. It has a way of enhancing your senses. Everything you taste, hear, see, smell and touch is enriched. Nowhere else feels quite like it.
So a nice little entree into Melbourne. So as you can see, built on both sides of the river there. So it's interesting. Sydney and Melbourne kind of have the same rivalry as maybe LA or San Francisco have with New York. So this is a few little shots of the difference from the eyes of a Victorian to somebody who lives in New South Wales or Sydney. So Sydney is a place to see, Melbourne is a place to do. So a few of the shots of how they see themselves different than their big cousin to the north. And I'll explain a few of these little shots as we go through the presentation. So Melbourne's a city of laneways and arcades. And that really explains it really, really well. It's a very cool city to walk around. You can do that on your own. It's generally better to have some sort of guided program so that you can understand the difference between all the lanes and arcades. But that is quintessential Melbourne. It's full of restaurants and bars and artwork throughout all of the lanes and arcades. The dining throughout those areas could be in the lanes and arcades or just in normal streets. But one of the other fun facts of Melbourne is that it has the highest number of restaurants and cafes per head of population of any city in the world. So if you're a foodie, it is just an amazing destination. The National Gallery of Victoria is also famous for the largest stained glass ceiling in the world, 51 meters by 15 meters. So that's probably about 60 yards by 18 yards, about more than half the size of a football field as a stained glass ceiling. Quite magnificent. The Eureka building is the second highest building in Melbourne. So on floor 88 is their viewing floor, not too dissimilar than the Sears Tower in Chicago. The cool thing about this is when you're in the city, you have no idea that you're so close to the Pacific Ocean, which you can see there on the right-hand side. So it's an amazing city. There's a great restaurant a couple of floors above it on floor one floor above it on 89. So nice place to have some fine dining. Another great way to see Melbourne from the air is ballooning over the city. It's just a very, very spectacular city, and great perspective to see it from the air. I talked about being a foodie city. One of the things that you can do is walk the lanes and arcades, or have a foodie tour put on organized by Lisa as part of your tour. Cooking classes. So it just has amazing cafe culture, a great coffee culture. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's definitely a destination in Australia that you want to put on your itinerary. Different Melbourne boroughs, sort of similar to our suburbs, but a little bit smaller. Every borough has a different kind of feel about it. Another little fun fact about Melbourne: it is the largest. It has the largest population of people from Greece or Italy outside of their own country. So very, very culturally diverse city. They seem to think they're the capital of Australian fashion, and good for them. So if you're into fashion, another reason. Oops. Just try and get back there a little bit. So excuse me, I'm a little bit impatient there. So I may have missed a couple of slides. This is one of the many luxury properties in Melbourne, but there are plenty of medium grade and above properties, whether they apartment style or luxury. There's plenty of options for you in Melbourne itself. There's a shot there of the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and I wanted to talk about that because Melbourne is known as the sports capital of Australia, purely because it has the biggest number of sporting events of any Australian city. It has the Australian Open for tennis, it has the Formula One Grand Prix, it has the Australian Football League, AFL or Aussie Rules Grand Final, it has the Moto Grand Prix with motorcycling race, and it also has one of the largest horse racing spring carnivals in the country. And the coolest thing, I'll show you a slide later, is almost all of these sporting stadiums are within walking distance of downtown. So you can be a part of the action, staying in the centre of Melbourne. Everything's about as close as Soldier Field is, or even closer from the centre of Chicago. So much closer than Wrigley Field would be, or Sox Park. So if you're a sporting fan, it's a great city to go and see all sorts of different sports. So I wanted to show you this map. It gives you an idea of the state of Victoria and everything sort of outside of Melbourne. Some of the things that you might take day trips to do. I'm going to talk about the Great Ocean Road later, but you've got Ballarat out there, which is the old gold mining capital. I'll talk a little bit about that. You've got the Yarra Valley, one of the great wine growing areas of Australia. Mornington Peninsula, a similar type of vineyard area. You've got Phillip Island there, which is where you go to see the fairy penguins, and you've got Wilson's Promontory, which is about a 2.5 hour drive from Melbourne. Has wonderful hiking trails. It's teeming with wildlife. So everything there is around about 2.5 hours or less from the centre of Melbourne. So wonderful for day tours. The Great Ocean Road is world renowned, not too dissimilar, I guess, in its in how famous it is as the coastal road from San Francisco to LA, but an awful lot more dramatic with the 12 apostles there that you can see. But there's so much more to do on the Great Ocean Road. I will talk a little bit about that when we go over that in a few more slides. If you don't have the time to do the road visit, it's an easy heli tour from downtown Melbourne, and you get a spectacular view of the 12 apostles and the Great Ocean Road from the air by heli. You can also drive down and heli back, or you could do a heli tour when you get down there. So there's all sorts of ways of seeing the 12 apostles from the air. One of the big things about the state of Victoria is it's plentiful with Australian wildlife. And there's lots of tour programs that you can do on a private or small group basis. One of my favourite tour operators down there is a company called Echidna Walkabout, that you can go walking on a day tour out in search of wallabies and wallaroos and koalas in the wild. But on any of the tours down through the Great Ocean Road, there's plenty of wildlife for your guide to pull over and see, or if you're doing a self-drive as well. One of the more famous shots of in Australian tourism is Anglesea. This is a golf course on the coast on the Great Ocean Road, and if you look closely, obviously you can see the greens there. So lots of kangaroos that will tell you to play through. Also on the Great Ocean Road, you have a rainforest. Right on the southern tip is the Otway Rainforest, beautiful waterfalls and walkways through the rainforest at the Otway National Park. I showed you a couple of the vineyard areas. This is the Yarra Valley, one of the more famous wine growing areas of Australia. Famous for its Pinots and its reds. They have some good Sauvignon Blancs there as well. Even though I'm a Kiwi, I still admit that Australia has some good Savs. So one of the things you can do out there, as I mentioned, it's a great way to see Melbourne, is doing a balloon ride over Melbourne City. You can also do balloon rides in the Yarra Valley as well. And there we go. Beautiful view over the vineyards. Exceptional cellar doors throughout the region. Shandon has a vineyard there, but there is probably a good 200 odd vineyards in that area. So plenty of wine and options for wine tasting and dining. And there's some great accommodations out in the Yarra Valley as well. One of my favorite places in all of Australia is the Healesville Sanctuary. And it's a animal sanctuary that my company actually donates to. They were very much involved with the caring for any of the animals that were affected by the fires. One of the cool things that you can do out there is actually swim with a platypus. It's very hard to find platypus. They're a very shy species in Australia and very hard to see in the wild, but this gives you an opportunity to actually get up close and personal with them. Phillip Island to the southeast of Melbourne is a place where thousands and thousands of visitors go and watch the fairy penguins come in at nightfall after they've been out searching for food for their young. And there are many, many ways that you can see them up close and personal like this, in behind a fenced off or walled-in area that you can see here. So that is going through a huge redevelopment and lots of investment going into that, mainly to protect the species and make it a more eco-type experience. There's the Koala Conservation Centre out near Phillip Island. And there we go. There's some of the options that you can see with the penguins coming up from the dunes and going to their nesting areas. So this is all near the Mornington Peninsula. You go via the Mornington Peninsula to get to Phillip Island, so you can make a day of that, utilising their vineyards, their beaches. It's a beautiful part of Melbourne, a little less touristy and a little less, it's more of a locals area, the Mornington, and some great opportunities for accommodation and touring. These are the famous bathing boxes that they have on the beaches there. These are individually owned. Some people keep their canoes or small yachts in those areas, and very famous for their very picturesque colours, and it's a typical part of a Melbourne lifestyle. Another sanctuary that's well known in Victoria is the Moonlit Sanctuary, and that's another stopover on your way to visit the penguins either to or from. or when you're out looking or enjoying the wine growing areas of that area. Melbourne's known for its spa and wellness properties as well, both in the centre of Victoria and down near the wine growing areas. So lots of opportunities to be healthy while you're in Victoria. And I can't stop talking about the foodie experiences throughout the whole of the state. Jackalope is a new luxury property that just came online a couple of years ago out on the Mornington Peninsula. So it has its own vineyard as well as its foodie experiences. It's an eclectic property, something that typifies the countryside of Victoria. And if you're looking for something a little bit different than that takes you outside of the metropolitan Melbourne area, Jackalope is a stunning property to stay at. So if we were looking at a typical sort of time in Melbourne over a 3-night period, these are the options for you. And you can do a couple of them in a day. Certainly the day one has a number of options that can be combined. As with day two, it's really important if you're there during the sporting season to go to an Aussie rules match or go to a rugby game. If you're lucky enough to be there during the Aussie Open, the Australian Open, do the tennis. There is great golfing events. There's obviously some amazing golf courses in Melbourne. So utilize those experiences if you're there at a particular time of the year. Day three basically is based on, full day itineraries, whether you're going to the wine districts of the Yarra or the Mornington Peninsula, going and seeing the penguins at Phillip Island, or doing a full day on Great Ocean Road. So plenty that you can do over a 3-night, 4-day stay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a driving itinerary that you can use with the 12 Apostles and the Great Ocean Road being the focal part of the touring. The Great Ocean Road, if you took it to extreme, goes from Melbourne all the way through to Adelaide. Tonight, I'm really just talking about staying within the confines of Victoria, but next month I'm going to be taking the Great Ocean Road all the way through to South Australia and looking at Kangaroo Island. So there'll be a slide coming up shortly, which I'll enlighten you with how we make that journey, but this one stays within the borders of Victoria. And it's basically a 6-day or a 5-day itinerary. So it enables you to have a nice first day driving down to Torquay. Only about a 60-mile drive, gives you some touring along the way, some beautiful surf coasts and some animal experiences on the way, and staying that first night in Torquay before heading off to do the official Great Ocean Road the next day. So it's a little bit of a longer day, around about sort of just under 200 miles all the way through to Warrnambool or Port Fairy, and that gives you the opportunity to look at the Great Ocean Road, the 12 Apostles, do a flyover, get down on the beach and walk along some of the amazing beaches, visit Cape Otway, which I showed you before, which is the rainforest. And then before that, heading inland. This is kind of a wine itinerary, which does take you through some of the vineyard areas. but then heading up into the Grampians, which is a nature reserve in Victoria, known for its sandstone mountains, wildlife, echidnas, wallabies, just an amazing part of northern Victoria. Overnighting there, and then, as I'll show you in a minute, heading back to Ballarat. So sort of on your way back to Melbourne. Ballarat is the third largest city in Victoria, and it's the home of the gold rush back in 1851. So it has some wonderful sovereign hill history. So that's worth certainly worth an overnight stay to explore that area. And then either heading back into Melbourne or heading up to Daylesford into Spa Country. So that gives you a really, it's called the Southern Touring Route, Great Southern Touring Route, as opposed to the Great Ocean Road that takes you all the way through to Adelaide. It's a circuitous trip. And if I take a look at it here, so on the first day we would head down to Torquay, and then we would go all the way. So here's the 12 Apostles here, there's Cape Otway, and we would overnight either in Port Campbell, really beautiful area, or in Warrnambool. And then we head on up here to Hell's Gap, then to Ballarat. You can do that little circuitous trip up to Daylesford or head back into Melbourne. So if you are into a driving journey throughout South Australia, that's a perfect way to get yourself around and see an amazing state and some wonderful different sites. So next month, I'm going to talk about going from, I won't talk about the Great Ocean Road because we've already sort of talked about that part of the journey, but that takes you all the way through to Adelaide. So that's the last part of it, going through to Adelaide. And then we're going to talk about Kangaroo Island and some of the other great areas of South Australia, the Barossa, Port Campbell, Port Adelaide, some amazing parts of these other southern areas of Australia. And hopefully later on in the year, I'll be able to come back and talk a little bit more in depth about Tasmania, the Red Centre, with a little bit more about Uluru and the Northern Territory, up around the top end of Australia, and also Western Australia. But that's basically it for the state of Victoria. So if you've got any questions, we'd be happy to answer any right now. The one thing I mentioned before was how close all the sports stadiums are to downtown Melbourne. So this is the biggest stadium. This is where the 56 Olympics were held. And this is the whole tennis centre right throughout here. Then you've got another VFL smaller stadium. You've got another major event centre there. And downtown you have another huge rugby and football stadium as well. So all of these stadiums are seriously within sort of walking distance of downtown Melbourne. This is the Arts Centre here. So it is a very, very easy city to get around. It has the largest tram system outside of Europe. So if you're wanting to get around without a vehicle, you can just hop the trams. That's easy to do. So yeah, it's a very, very cool city, and we would welcome you visiting Melbourne.
So Peter, we do have a few questions. The first question that I'm reading is, if you had to say, what would be one of the must-see things to see in Melbourne? Like if you only, let's say you had a short time and you couldn't do this extensive of, an itinerary as far as what you're talking about, what would you say would be the most must-see thing to do in Melbourne?
Yeah, good question. The typical stay for an American tourist is just 3 nights. So, the iconic things to do are obviously lanes and arcades. And that's, an easy morning or afternoon or evening or even an evening tour. If you're into wine, it would be either the Yarra Valley or the Mornington Peninsula, or it would be a full day on the Great Ocean Road. And the one that, everybody thinks about when they talk about Melbourne is they want to see the fairy penguins. That is sort of a afternoon and full evening tour. Note that the penguins come in from the ocean in the late or in the early evening at dusk. So in the summertime, when the days are so long, that can be 9, 10 o'clock at night. So you're not getting back to Melbourne until about midnight. So whereas in the winter months it's a lot earlier. So that's a really full day. So yeah, the iconic things are a sporting event if you're lucky enough to be during that time. Great Ocean Road, the lanes and arcades, and the penguins, and or wine and food.
Perfect. And as far as when you're talking about the penguins, I know there's a couple of different types of penguin excursions, if you want to call them that. Can you explain maybe, I know you showed a picture of one where they were sitting on the beach. I think that's my favorite excursion. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, it's basically based on the almighty dollar and what you're prepared to pay for. There are private guided experiences like the one you saw. There are interactive experiences like the ones that are underground, that are small group and or private, or you can sit in the bleachers with literally hundreds of other people. So it really depends. There are big coach tours that go out that still have a wonderful experience, but you are in a big coach tour and you're sitting with kind of the masses. And then there's the small group tours of sort of between 12 and 14 people. And they have various different levels of visibility and accessibility to the penguins. And then there are private tours with your own ranger that take you very much up close and personal to them.
Perfect. And then one other question I see here is, can you explain like how stressful the driving is if you decide to do a driving tour?
Boy, having lived here for 30 years, when I go home, I still have to concentrate on making sure I'm on the right side of the road. We would never put you in a vehicle, coming off a trans-Pacific flight. So, we make sure that one, you're acclimatized to the time zone, that you're not too weary, and we don't put you in a vehicle where it's like driving in Manhattan. So the driving experiences in Australia and New Zealand are better when they are these sort of coastal drives. New Zealand's a little bit easier because we don't have the big expressways there, but it's not as hard as people think it is. All you have to do is remember that you have the center of the road in the right place. Yeah, I mean, everybody's different. There are tens of thousands of Americans that go to Australia and New Zealand and drive confidently. I wouldn't rent a car to drive around Melbourne or drive around Sydney. That just makes no sense. But to do these touring routes between Sydney and Melbourne, or Melbourne and Adelaide, or Melbourne throughout the rural areas, once you're comfortable driving on the other side of the road, it's a very easy thing to do.
And would you give them driving instructions like before they go?
We don't, but there are there are instructions that are given to drivers by the rental car companies, and I guess by us as well by default, but not actual not physical instruction. Really, it's the vehicle is exactly the same. It's just that you want to make sure that that the steering wheel is in the center of the road. That's I've always found it harder with a motorbike because there's no steering wheel. So when you're on a motorbike, you get completely disorientated what side of the road you're on. With a car, you don't, because you just have to have that steering wheel in the center as opposed to the side of the road.
That's good advice. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Now, you said for the next, our next series of webinars, you're going to have a guest speaker along with you?
That's the plan. I have lined up Ernst from South Australia Tourism, and I have just been on the road with a fellow who's known as the Mayor of Kangaroo Island, who's going to help me with some funny PowerPoint presentations of KI. And KI just went under, had some devastating fires, which nearly half of Kangaroo Island got affected by the fires. So there's some fascinating shots that we have of the amazing regeneration of the countryside, and so that's the plan. Ernst and I will be on board in a month. I'm not sure if we actually know the date. I think it might be a Wednesday, and we'll be talking about all the things that South Australia and Kangaroo Island have to offer.
Great, and we'll be continuing our journey, which I'm very excited about. I've been looking forward to this, so I'm sure many more of you have as well. So anyway, we will keep you up to date on the next date. I know it's approximately about a month, but I think we've changed it to a Wednesday to just try to accommodate some of the other people that may want to join us. So Peter, I appreciate so much you being with us and sharing this part of Australia with us. Also on the update that you've given us on the brush fires, I know it's nice to hear it firsthand rather than in the so-called news, because you don't really get the truth, but with you I know I'm getting the truth. So I appreciate that you sharing that with us as well.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you next time. So thanks again, Peter, and we will see you in approximately about a month.
Okay, thanks, Lisa.
All right, have a great evening. Good night, everybody.